Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Best Book Club, the podcast where I discuss the best stories with the best minds in the community. I'm your host, Nufatura, and on this episode, I have something very special I've been working on for multiple months now. I'll be stepping back and taking a look at the evolution of literature in the Lucky Fetish Forum. Along the way, I'll be highlighting stories that have had a major influence or impact, or have left a lasting legacy or inspiration on the community. Keep in mind that this will be focused on fictional stories from the Lucky Fetish board, along with context to garner a more complete picture from various community members, and so is in no way a comprehensive look at the fetish as a whole, and will be based in opinion primarily from myself as well as the perspectives of others that I've talked to. My criteria for choosing stories to spotlight are ones that have more than 10,000 views and either did something different with the story format, raised the bar on the level of quality, maintained that level, or a mix of the three. However, if a story has 10,000 or more views but has underage content, that story will not be brought up. Now, of the pretty large amount of stories on the fictional section, including the celebrity and non-human subsections, 112 had over 10,000 views, and of those, only 9 have underage content. There are a few threads that contain multiple short stories with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of views, and so without a proper metric of how well they did individually, I felt it necessary to include them. The stories I researched spanned from 2011 to 2021. Now, with words as nebulous as legacy or impact, there are a near infinite amount of ways to define them, especially in this community. So rather than try to pin down a single definition as the correct one, here are multiple that can create a wider and more complete understanding from some of the best writers today, not to mention some of my favorite.
The evolution in the writing for the community, I find that there are a lot of things that still are the same, that some stories are just nice, simple, and to the point, but with the evolution, like going from Wedgie Girls to Lucky Fetish, was that these stories got more elaborate, that it was a bigger focus on characters themselves. And then just moving from Lucky Fetish to the other different platforms where you had Wedgie Haven and Wedgie Buddies being more male centric, but just simply moving to the to platforms like DeviantArt, where now those restrictions of it's just a female centric or male centric limitations are not as prevalent outside of whichever groups that you're posting these stories to. And so in a lot of ways it has evolved since the beginning of the community, that it has evolved greatly due to just how innovative these stories have become, how more elaborate these stories become, that it's more about the characters than just the fetish of itself.
It comes in waves. In each of them, there are exceptions. They are not hard rules. Like the early stories I read were mostly a way to recreate real life wedges in text, that something spontaneous and without much context. Then stories came out which were mainly fan fiction, including wedges in their plots. After that, I think stories came out with their own original characters and settings. Right now, I think there is a good balance of all of the previous types, all of the previous waves I mentioned. Though there are so many stories that don't fit the current trend, even though smaller trends come and go.
Writing in the community has not really evolved, but there's trends we're seeing today affecting who is writing, what they're writing, and why, that is slowly shaping the community's literary scene. Hi, I'm Hannsgutherson, aka Wedgie from Lucky Fish, the writers of stories such as Lucy and Daniela, YWNR, and Teacher Wedgie Fight, as well as the co-writer with Shadow-melder, Delia Knife, and Flame Over Darkness. I've been reading Wedgiefish literature for about 10 years on practically every site that Wedgiefishists have ever gathered, and in that time I've been able to be an active part on any and all evolutions. And I'm here to tell you that there are a few small trends, while not new to us or new in terms of timeliness, that we can see, and they're hopefully forming the fabric, pun intended, of greater and more consistent evolutions. But let's not forget that any discussion of changes must start with a thorough examination of the past. The early days of writing in the community can be traced back to the early 2000s, 2 decades after the internet was formed, interestingly, with the wedgiegirls.com site. It had both a true and fictional story section, and the site was taken down by the hosting company ProBoard circa 2010-2011. But interestingly, in its time, it was a pretty popular place. In 2007, for example, the true section had more than 2,500 posts, and the fictional had more than 4,000 posts. And the thing is, there's some aspects, some elements, some tropes, shall we call them, of literature that we can see and we can point out pretty easily by looking at some of those early stories. From what we can view, underage content was prevalent. Some of the most popular stories there. Also, and this is another point I'm getting to, it's littered with spelling errors. To sort of sum up some of this, 15 of the 19 stories on one page of that old Wedgie Girls site features underage characters. It's approximately 78% of the stories on one page. And these are characters in significant roles, like they're giving or getting wedgies. One that doesn't feature underage characters, Two Friends Part 2 from 2007 by Sneaks141, is just poorly written. Characters' dialogue makes no sense, characters' names not consistently capitalized, like obvious stuff like that. So I mention all this because when the community moved to LF in 2011, we have this legacy we're carrying. A legacy of underage characters, poorly written stories, and according to posts on LF in 2011 by users like WonderWhy2 and Aereo, people stealing stories is not uncommon. So let's now look at 2011 when Lucky Fish forms. Those first stories on LF, and I'm focusing on LF at the moment because I know it's the focus of these questions. Those first stories in 2011, ones like Selena Gomez and Demi Lovato at the beach, 2011 by Wedgie MILF. Stories like that, the names aren't even capitalized and are typical of Wedgie Girls stories, and by that I mean they're poorly written, lacking grammar, capitalization, dialogue tags, all these things that you want from good stories typically. Plus, there's no real story here. It's scenarios. Selena and Demi go to the beach and wedgies ensue similarly. So they're bringing this over. What is good is Puppy Dog is one of the first major writers who are changing things on Lucky Fish forums with their stories like May and Connie. It's better written, spelling is clean, there's good dialogue tags, names capitalized, and even italics for music lyrics. Puppy Dog is part of this broader shift we're seeing away from underage content on the board. Jaws, Weekend Wedgie Wars, also in 2011, characters aren't underage and stories are cleaner. So not only Puppy Dog, there's other examples, but he's a prominent one that's recognizable. A significant shift is in 2011, there's a user named Gnome who deletes the underage story. It was deleted, and he pointed out the rule around underage characters. Gnome then goes on to repost the popular Polly and Jane stories by P-Polar, where characters are not underage. So from a basic level, we get a slow and not entirely consistent, but relatively sort of consistent trend towards a removal and absence of underage characters from stories being posted here. And users are quick to point out when someone is breaking the rule. So from that, legacy that I keep mentioning that we carry over, we can see broader and more nuanced shifts and trends. We see on Lucky Fish forums the board is getting its own identity. And this is identity where female stories are welcomed and male stories are shunned. We have numerous examples of this. In 2015, Anti-Cherry points it out in a comment on the wonderful story Alice. And years later, in 2018, on my own story Alice and Taylor, Nufatora sums this up, and I quote, he says, "Please continue on another site. I don't mean to sound rude, but this is a female wedgie forum, not a male wedgie forum." And he's not alone in thinking and saying that. Two other users echo this sentiment with similar replies on that story. So how does this filter into an evolution? Well, entire, let's call them subgenres of wedgie fish literature can't and don't exist on Lucky Fish forums. This is significant because it's one of the multiple reasons the board declines. But I'm jumping ahead. Other aspects of the board's identity we can see are a move towards, but never a consistent move, towards interactivity and writer interaction. Interaction with each other, but also with the audience of readers. The interesting thing about forums is interactivity is a way of leveraging the forum format. You have a set user base who check back regularly, a site that's built in a way where writers can naturally continue a story in one thread, and a layout which visually flows and is easy for readers to keep track of. Plus, obviously, content is just there. All of it is displayed on pages with 20 posts per page, and you don't need to go hunting for it. And then what we see as early as circa 2014 with Community Story, started by Pony X9, an underrated player in LF's development and its growth, as stagnated as that growth is. We see an attempt towards creating a story where multiple writers continue a story together. This spawns two other attempts, one sci-fi, but none of them, except for the first one, really run beyond a few posts. Attempts throughout the years, such as the Arena 2016 by Pony X9, myself in 2017 with the community-based writing project, and others from users like Random Dude in 2018 who links to writing.com full of interactive stories, and myself creating other community projects like contests and such, or the third community story that we do. So there's not much demand or interest in these projects, these experiments, and they taper off without success or any successful, and by successful I mean like thousands of views, tens of thousands of views, or great interaction from writers of the community replications. Now we haven't even talked about, and I say this in air quotes, true story section. I won't go too much into it here. There's a few points I want to briefly outline. Let's push aside the question of whether many of these stories are real, although I doubt it with some of them. But there is this problem with underage experiences and stories. And interestingly, and to the point of writing and evolutions, on the true story section, there's none of these so-called evolutions that we see in the fictional story section. No interactivity, no experimenting with different lengths or formats or types of content. Any tries to be particularly experimental. Section's power has certainly waned over the years, as there was only 10 threads that got posted on in 2022, and 8 in 2021, and like 10 in 2020, down from numbers that were pretty much double all those in 2011 and 2012. It isn't fair to fall back on vast generalizations. I also want to say that stories, for example, got better or longer, even more realistic as years went on the fictional story section. We had stories like Puppy Dogs, Me and Connie, which ran for 15 parts and was well written. Those were posted in 2011. And some of the board's biggest stories were posted in 2012, Luckily Unlucky and Sore Winner by Anti-Cherry, being two obvious and popular examples. Sure, some of the writers, myself included, grew up, and so hopefully our writing improves with them. But in the last few years, these writers who came up on the site, ones like Awesomeness Poner, last post on LF in 2021, the writer of Gotham Girls, and Cecita, his last post on LF was in 2017, have abandoned the forum site. So we haven't been able to really see the improvements of their writing or growth from them experimenting, them trying different things on Lucky Fish forums. Another way to look at it is that YWNR was a 100,000 word story published on LF in 2015. And stories anywhere near that long are a great exception to the rule that most of the stories on LF are short, unfinished pieces. This is probably the best segue I'll get to talk about the decline of the board. Those major names I mentioned leaving the board is one of the reasons for its decline, which is significant because there haven't been many new writers to fill the gaps. In 2022, there was only like 20 posts continued in the fictional story section. Not a lot. The PHP update, making old stories hard to read and new stories hard to post, is a major deterrent on the board where, and this is key, the viewers have already started moving away from. Posted in 2015, Lucy and Daniela has more than 300,000 views. Stories posted this year have less than 1,000. That is not rewarding for writers when it's common for stories on DA to get thousands of views. Story posted on DA this week titled Just a Random Wedgie Story I Got Bored and Wrote by Random Fecker already has around 500 views. Two others also posted in the last couple days, such as Bullying Has No Age Limit Part 2 and Camp Wedgie Ghost version, both have over 1,000 views. Plus, to sum up earlier points, the board features only one type of content, FF. And for those interested in just FF wedgies, it's fine. But there's no incentive for those writing or reading literally any other type of content to join the board or be a part of it. And Lucky's attempt in only 2019 to address this in a user base that's been falling off a cliff. For example, in 2018, there was literally only 5 new members according to the site stat in the year. It jumps in 2019, which is a year the new FM section is launched, but it's a little too late. It's a little too late because the numbers keep declining. Just over 1K new members joined in 2020 and 2021, but in 2022 there was only 584 new members. And in terms of the number of posts, there's only 790 new posts in 2022 compared to 1,700 in 2021. That's about a 76% decrease in new content being posted, new posts being made, new communication on the board, really highlighting how it's fallen. So there's a lack of consistent innovation when we have a single-minded focus on FF content. A PHP update, which Lucky has said he will not fix, and that was its nail in the coffin, which is effectively spelled the end of the board. So users have gone elsewhere, not forums really. Wedgie Haven and its descendant Wedgie Buddies, for other reasons I won't go into here. Suffice it to say, some of the reasons are the same as the ones that spelled LF Slow Death. They only had 16 continued posts on the male fictional stories section on Wedgie Buddies in 2022. I'll give you a second to guess how many were made / continued in the female section's stories in 2022. The answer is only 5 posts were made or continued, and those are from 2 people, myself and ChaosReacon. So what we're seeing replace the forums is the content sharing sites like DA, which has seen popular wedgie stories being shared on it since at least circa 2012. And Wattpad is another example. Stories there like Wedgie Tales by Captain Kata Voss has 155,000 views, and it was last added to in 2022. Wedgie Love by Naomi Stories 12 has 133,000 views, and that's from 2019. These stories are not particularly exceptional, ginormous paragraphs, no real detail or anything creative in the plots or stories. But as I've been trying to hammer home all these negative points, hitting on the fact there hasn't really been obvious evolutions, quote unquote. What is important is that there are some obvious exceptions to the wedgie rules I'm outlining. I'm one of the first to have noted these throughout history, so don't think I'm hating on the community. Just trying to contextualize the fact that things haven't changed yet. Not as much as they could have, but I'm hoping that they will. So some of the things we're seeing now as trends is a bit more interactivity in the last few years. Users like Indoor Stereos on DA with the Wedgie Quiz 2021, my own short stories circa 2019, and Shadow-melder's The Atrium from 2020. Another obvious example is Between Two Cheeks, who created the community's first visual novels. BTC showed us a new side to writing and creativity in the community. So, sweeping over a lot of nuance and time now, we're seeing now more creative packaging for writing, which is equally as important as the writing itself. This fits into the trend of businessifying or businessification in the community. It's affecting the writing, and now we're seeing products like e-zines like Wedgie Wednesday from Danger Wedgier, which features stories and writing, and that's from circa 2021-2022. There have also been attempts to spark creativity with contests. Some of them run, typically restricting word counts or featuring specific topics, participants have to follow. But again, these haven't been particularly consistent. What we need to ask ourselves, will we see shifts like contests, new types of content beyond written stories, e-zines, visual novels, audio stories, podcasts? They were a bit of a trend, but they're not very common. Will all these inspire an evolution in the writing in the community? Or will things remain mostly the same as they have since those early days in 2011 or so, with a few unexpected experiments popping up every once in a while over the years? I'm hoping they'll inspire a real evolution, but at the moment it's only just starting and it's happening very slowly.
Yes, hello. This is RookofSpades giving my answers to these various lovely questions here. First off, we have looking from our origins to today, how do you feel writing has evolved in the community? Well, I think that overall the community has grown much more interwoven. As I say, early on it seemed very focused upon just getting your writings out there, making them open to the world, and they seem to exist much more in a vacuum, like you were just initially yelling out into the void and whatnot. Nowadays, you see a lot more collaboration between writers, whether it's making stories together, having characters interact, etc., which is very nice to see. And that among the more prevalent sections of the community, such as the Edgin from Sesata, Sleepall Today, and Pixelated Kai, myself, others, we got many people there that are all very cool. Various collaborations between Shadow-melder and our dear friend Hannsgutherson, etc., things like that. Much of the stories and such focus towards sort of feeding each other's creativity, which leads to, well, A, better stories, and B, more people being exposed to those stories, which is very nice. In summary, it's grown from very simple tales, just sort of in there, out, one and done, to noticeable uptick in collaboration and tales that work to almost outcompete each other, which is, it's almost like a community of friendly rivals, if nothing else. It's very nice.
I would say it's gotten longer. A lot of speaking from somebody who only grew up on DA, never discovered the original Lucky Fetish forums or anything like that. Most stories that were on DA when I started getting into the community a long time ago, they were very simple setup stories that never went above like a 5-minute read. Most stories were their scenario was girl who is a little bit nerdy, is being a nerd. She meets a stronger bully type, and that bully gives her a wedgie. And that's the end of the story. And it never really evolved past that for like a good solid I'd say a good solid 3 years. Stories never really got deeper on DA. Um, like even when Magni hit the scene, like his very first stories are extremely simple setups. They follow the Amy Wedgie esque plot line of there's a nerd girl bully Wedgie. His locker room stories are a huge example of that. Um, but until a lot of Lucky Fetish writers started to come over to DA, stories never really got deep or anything like that. Um, that's how I would describe the difference between the classic stories and the modern stories, where we start to care a little bit more about what we're writing rather than how quick can we get off to this thing.
I've had this idea for a long time now, first vocalizing it on Hannsgutherson's Wedgie Talk podcast back in January of 2020, and fleshing it out as I went in multiple episodes of this podcast. The first quote-unquote draft or iteration of this idea was the Renaissance, as I called it, a period I believed happened starting in 2011 with the inception of the Lucky Fetish Forum and ending in early 2016. Now, something to keep in mind from here on. Content reflecting the desires of creators will be a trend that can be easily followed through this oral essay. To give context to how I drew this conclusion, we have to take a look back to the original WedgieGirls.com website, which I originally found at the tail end of its life when I was first coming into the fetish myself. The stories on there were extremely basic, to put it lightly. As it was one of the first major locations officially dedicated to wedgie fetishists on the internet, people were simply looking to get off, and as a result, the stories that were posted reflected this. Rushed writing, skimping on detail, wedgies happening left and right, logic be damned. Essentially, pure excitement at having a space to call our own, and wanting to get our desires out there to connect, in the hope that none of us were alone in this interest, this sexualization of a seemingly mundane and schoolyard prank. As with all beginnings, the community had its share of fumbles and lessons to be learned during this first iteration, the biggest being the necessity of rules and regulations. The original WedgieGirls.com was shut down due in part to the presence of underage content. If anyone has a desire to examine that piece of our history, they can use the Wayback Machine, a digital archive of the internet, though your work will be cut out for you. Lacking a place to gather and share content, one member of the community, Lucky, had a domain already registered, and using it started a forum in 2011 using simple machines, and provided the funds to allow us to continue to gather and grow. This forum, Lucky Fetish, almost immediately became the hub for visual and written content, including videos, pictures, art, and true and fictional stories.
Something with a legacy or impact, simply just being something that was big, that it left an impression on many people, such as from the early days. For me, it would have been Wedgie Academy by whoever the original writer was. Neko Squad Pink by Jack 538, or Alistair Cade as he's now known by. Val the Vampire by Puppy Dog, and so on. Those were the stories that really influenced me to where nowadays you have stories like Flame Over Darkness, where even though I'm more friends with the writers, just how much just that story left an impact on not just only myself, but obviously through some other members of the community, that there were poems being written, or even a fanfic being written in the world of Flame Over Darkness.
To me, something is considered having a legacy if it continues to be talked about, discussed, or just remembered after it has passed some time. In the context of stories or authors, this might mean after they retire or simply after a year or so. It's a term open to interpretation, but as long as it hasn't been 100% forgotten, the legacy lives.
How would I define something having a legacy or impact? The question can be answered by asking one question: did it inspire others? Were others inspired to create something like it, borrow from it, make their own versions of it? Auntie Cherry is the Shakespeare of our community because he is often referenced and emulated by others, for example.
I'd say the best way to describe legacy in this community is to have one's absence noticed, oddly enough. As is the nature of online communities, creators tend to retire, go off into the void, vanish almost entirely, move on to different projects, etc. And generally, the community has a good way of filling that absence, sort of compensating almost as new writers step in to sort of fill the various niches and whatnots. The best example that I can think of will probably be Bloom, given that they've left, and now every time I see any story written in a similar vein as their work, you see people saying, "Ah, this reminds me of Bloom." Oh no, yes, and aha, is that Bloom's girl? And things like that. As is the nature of things, and internet communities being as they are, being able to maintain a fraction of sort of a zeitgeist in what is generally a very fickle area is quite remarkable, really.
Subjective. I'd call it a subjective question because, yeah, like something that like touches a lot of people. Like it doesn't touch everybody. Like it's like that Family Guy joke. I did not care for The Godfather. Like it's just some forms of art. No matter how many people say it's super good, it's not always appreciated by every single person. So how would I define something having a legacy? I For my individual self, I would say if it gave me inspiration or made me see something new that I haven't seen yet, for me that means it had an impact. The biggest example I can think of is all of the inspiration that I had from Hannsgutherson, where his story about his story Wedgie Love and Teacher Wedgie Fight showed me that there can be a deeper type of story, one that explores the inner workings of the fetish and the mindset of people who have it, and how that mindset like affects a person, specifically affects them in how they wedgie or how they go about exploring their fetish. And that's stuff that I've wanted to try and capture for a long time. And for me, that is what is something that has an impact or a legacy. It had a legacy for me. I don't know if anybody else would have felt inspired by what Hannsgutherson wrote, specifically with those two stories I mentioned, but they impacted my life, so I would consider that a win in and of itself.
The first story posted on Lucky Fetish to reach over 10,000 views is Wedgie Academy by Wedgie Addict, a story saved from the original website by user and posted on April 10th, 2011 with almost 59,000 views. Within the first paragraph, this story clearly shows the hallmarks of what I brought up before: excitement for having a community of people who share the same interest, and wanting to transform internal desires into external media. It was certainly a step in the right direction, as all too many other stories from that website featured multiple wedgies with next to no details whatsoever. Yet there was still a deep chasm to cross when it came to actual storytelling. This was one of the first on the forum to feature the now cliche trope of the story happening in a school. The first major fan fiction came in the form of The Adventures of Batgirl by Puppy Dog, posted on April 17th, 2011, and gaining almost 19,000 views. This was another of the stories originally posted on wedgiegirls.com about Batgirl getting into various troubles with supervillains from Gotham. It made some strides in delivering characters that were already known, but showing them in a new light, and thereby pushed the level of quality in fanfiction to a new height. One of the most popular stories on the forum is As You Wish, the Returning Series by Jack538, posted May 6th, 2011, and currently with 303,000 views, about a man named James who finds himself the master of two genies and ends up fighting against demons. As the story progresses, the world was becoming more fleshed out and imaginative, though it was discontinued shortly after the main character's arrival in the demon world. This was a rewrite of the original post on wedgiegirls.com. Another big story, with almost 16,000 views, is The Downfall of Blacklight by Screen Warrior, a fanfiction about events that happened to Alex Mercer during the Prototype video game series, and was first posted on September 1st, 2011. In the same vein as The Adventures of Batgirl, this story took a well-known video game series and introduced wedgies in a creative and interesting way. One of the biggest stories to ever be part of the fetish is Luckily Unlucky by Anticherry, first posted on September 12th, 2011, and has a whopping 310,000 views, making it the most viewed story on the board. This story raised the bar for the level of quality writers could achieve, mixing in story with wedgies masterfully during a time when wedgies were the main focus, and is hailed constantly as one of the best to ever come out of the fetish by those who have had the pleasure of reading it. Another new stride came from Dual Strike The Gathering, with almost 11,000 views, and originally posted on September 25th, 2011, and written by Screen Warrior and Shadonki, and then helmed by numerous other writers. This story revolves around famous female characters from a wide range of media being transported to an island and fighting to be the last one standing in a battle royale. While this was also a fan fiction, this story not only crossed over multiple series, but was also the first major collaborative project on Lucky Fetish. While working on Luckily Unlucky, Anticherry started another little story by the name of Sore Winner, first posted on November 16th, 2011. With almost 300,000 views, this one is remembered slightly less than its cousin, yet achieved the same level of quality, though in a more episodic format. This story tells of the rivalry and growing bond between mother and daughter, and begins to hint at the potential consequences of blurring the line between parent and friend. Perhaps the biggest takeaway from Anticherry's magnum opuses is the focus on wedgies rather than story, yet so many of the people who hold them dear remember them for their characters. A Slut's Hanging Wedgie by Wedgie Author 14, with over 65,000 views, was the first to be posted on the forum that features a second-person point of view on March 20th, 2012. It describes how you, as a female, give yourself a hanging wedgie and the feelings that come with it. At a later time on the same day, a story from the Wedgie Girls site was posted by Anticherry, though no title or author was saved. It follows the same premise and point of view, but rather than the main character giving herself a hanging wedgie, she's ambushed in the woods and forced into one. Sadistic by Cosby Rerun is a tricky story to dissect, perhaps the most deceptive of any to come out of the community. First posted on October 3rd, 2012, with over 15,000 views, this story is told from the perspective of an extremely unreliable narrator, one who brands herself a liar only a short stint into the story. As soon as Haley labels herself as such, the truthfulness of everything said before and after is called into question, and so this can be considered the first story that truly captures the essence of Socrates' mindset, to question everything. The story is just as likely to be entirely correct as it is to be entirely made up, from a narrator who could be everything they say they are, but could also be the complete opposite. Perhaps one of the most well-written and eloquent stories on the forum comes in the form of Feeling the Fire Until It Burns by Nicely Done, posted November 24th, 2012, and currently has just over 10,000 views. This story took what Luckily Unlucky and Sorewinter started and flew with it, perfectly describing the 3 chapters provided and diving insanely deeply into the thought processes of 2 characters exploring their budding sexual interest for each other. The only thing readers can ask for from this story is more, as 3 chapters is criminally short for this caliber of writing. Following up such an amazing story is quite the mean feat, and yet Nicely Done was able to do so with Blood Money, first posted on April 22nd, 2013, with just over 15,000 views. This one follows a girl's exploration of a new world, guided by her sister, during which their tutor is dragged into the madness. Everything said about Feeling the Fire Until It Burns applies here as well, to a greater degree, due to it being longer and complete. Among all the stories on the forum, none went after the topic of a Groundhog Day effect, except Dreaming of 12-13-13 by White Rabbit, better known as Sleep All of Today on DeviantArt, and continued by Hannsgutherson. This story was posted on September 9th, 2013, and has over 14,000 views. The concept is simple. A woman is stuck in a loop of the same day over and over, and she's the only one aware of it. This was a very unique idea that is yet to be replicated today. The Tale of Wedgie Girl by Colton Washa is another story that centers on a unique idea. Posted on September 19th, 2013, with almost 37,000 views, this story focuses on a girl who transfers to a new school and quickly becomes a makeshift vigilante, one who can't seem to actually win any of her fights, instead getting massive wedgies left and right. It put a very interesting spin on the term Wedgie Girl, but was still faithful to most people's understanding of it. One of Saseda's earliest stories is the fanfiction Wonder Wedgie, posted on November 27th, 2013, with almost 20,000 views. It revolves around Wonder Woman being bested through wedgies and her attempts to get better at dealing with them. While the notion that super tough and badass women are stripped down to squealing nerds as soon as their underwear is pulled was far from new at the time, this is a very early example of Saseda's propensity for it, and an interesting look at one of the origins of that trope so common in his work. There are many writers who only posted one story, one of them being Wedgie Man 888 with Unanticipated Revenge. Posted December 16th, 2013 on one of the multi-story threads. This tells the story of 3 popular girls offering themselves to 3 nerds. While it may not have been the first to introduce the idea of the popular girl getting wedgied by the nerd, it certainly expanded on it in a unique and detailed way. The Frenemy Program by Tidy Whitey's 711 is a story that upends the normal school setting. Posted on December 20th, 2013 with almost 32,000 views, it follows a bully and a nerd as they have to set aside their differences or face severe punishment from the school. This one is an early example of actual character development to varying levels of quality. Some stories introduce new ideas, but don't have the same level of quality as others, and The Schoolgirl Slave and Her Master by Flamefeet is one of them. Posted on April 17th, 2014 with over 32,000 views, this story introduced a legitimate dom-sub relationship to the forum, albeit with not much quality in the way of actual writing. There are a plethora of long-form stories on the forum, though they tend to follow a similar structure: rapid-fire wedgies, vapid characters, little actual detail. Anti-Cherry stories are one of the exceptions to this, along with a little Lucky Fetish exclusive called Karate Friends by Saseda, posted May 20th, 2014, with over 40,000 views. This early work from Saseda provided extremely memorable characters exploring their sexuality and feelings for each other. Many other stories featured a bully who changed their ways, but it almost always felt hollow and unearned. Saseda delivered on this promise, detailing that dynamic between bully and bullied in a very realistic way. Unfortunately, this was one of all too many that remains unfinished, yet what is available has stuck with those who read it. The first legitimate communal story came in the form of the first untitled community story of 3, which currently has over 27,000 views and was written by Pony X9, Awesomeness Poner, Come On and Try Me, and Hannsgutherson. The first actual part was posted on June 7th, 2014, and revolves around a chance encounter bringing 5 characters of varying backgrounds together to face threats and circumstances they unintentionally find themselves in. Being able to bring together 4 writers on one project was quite a feat back in the day, and the story improved dramatically once they became comfortable with the characters each created. While there's only a handful of stories on the forum that focus on actual fantasy rather than realistic fiction, one of the highlights is another story helmed by Pony X9 titled The Heist. Posted on January 17th, 2015, with just over 14,000 views. This story tells of a thief attempting to steal the crown that determines the leadership of the nation, and how easily the tables can turn. Despite being a measly 2 parts, what's provided is rich with world building and characterization, and the sparse amount of dialogue truly feels fitting for the setting. Picking out the first story a writer crafts is almost always a pretty easy feat. They're trying to find their voice and style while transforming all their desires and wants wrapped up inside into external media. One exception to this is my all-time favorite story, Lucy and Daniela by Hannsgutherson, which was first posted on January 24th, 2015, and currently has almost 302,000 views, being very much deserved and deserving of much more views than that as well, in my opinion. This also holds the accolade of being the only piece of content to be stickied or kept at the top of the respective subsection that is wholly original and not a collection of random content or something along those lines. Now, while not technically the first actual story Hannsgutherson contributed to, Lucy and Daniela is his first original and standalone work, and stands out from the rest for a multitude of reasons, including, but not limited to, having a huge cast of very memorable characters, all being perfectly balanced, well-realized character arcs, of course, fantastically detailed wedgie scenes, and the list goes on. Fan fictions are a sort of dime a dozen in the community, and it can often be an easy trap to fall into, where escape from it is nearly impossible. Casual readers love seeing their favorite characters from other fandoms get wedgies in wild and inventive ways, and don't necessarily care for plot as much because they can just go to the source material. So when a story like Pantyborn by Scrin Warrior comes along and only takes the world of the fandom, but fills it with their own unique take on the story, it comes across as very refreshing and justification for why fanfictions are so popular for writers and readers. First posted on September 1st, 2015, with over 14,000 views, this story follows a female gamer who becomes stuck in the world of Bloodborne, learning quickly that wedgies are the true enemy, but discovering not long after that they can be just as much a friend. Scrin Warrior took an established world and reinvented it for himself, while at the same time providing enough of a tone and feel for the actual game that readers unfamiliar to it would be able to understand and follow along. Once 2015 hit, Hannsgutherson proved himself to be an unstoppable force, with back-to-back well-received and well-written stories. One being the short story Kara's Choice, posted on October 13th, 2015 in one of the multi-story threads. It centers around the titular protagonist being late to school and how her choice of clothing affects the rest of the day. Hans took a single wedgie and was able to fully capture everything that could happen during such a scenario, providing readers with a wedgie scene that focused not just on the wedgie, but also the psyches of the characters involved, fitting it all into a realistic setting and tone. Yet another story by Hannsgutherson to be highlighted is YWNR, posted originally on Wedgie Haven and then Lucky Fetish on October 16, 2015, with almost 17,000 views. While not having nearly the same amount of views as Lucy and Daniela, this is perhaps the one that's referenced most when discussing Hans' catalog, inspiring names like Anime Panties and Shadow-melder. Hans himself has called this the best story he's written time and time again, and you don't have to look far to see why. Breaking from the mold of duo dynamics, this story revolves around three characters as they discover and affirm who they are and what they want to be. Following in his familiar style, Hans tackles huge questions like what it means to be a fetishist and how you can figure out and maintain your sense of self in a constantly shifting landscape. At its base, this story is a question of humanity and how wedgies can not only be tied into that, but how they can also expand upon and enrich the answer. Among the multitude of superhero stories, the vast majority are fan fictions of well-established franchises and characters. One that stands apart from the rest and really leans into the comic book aesthetic and tone is High Velocity Superhero Wedgies by Random Person X, or Dodo Bird as they're more commonly known. First posted on December 1st, 2015, with over 17,000 views. This rather lengthy story follows two people who gain superpowers and have to balance learning how to use them properly with all the bullying that comes their way. While the idea of someone having to learn to be a proper hero isn't anything new, what sets this story apart is its diversity in how characters identify, along with highlighting some of the struggles of coming to understand and accept who you really are. Closing out 2015, one story that maintained the level of quality that it started to become prevalent is Legacy by Chloe, first posted on December 8th, 2015, with just over 10,000 views. There isn't much written for it, unfortunately, but what's there is very well done. It centers around a man who gets involved with a would-be robber, expertly laying out a scenario many can only dream of being in. This is yet another story that unfortunately ended prematurely, though the final part leaves the door wide open for anyone to imagine what would have happened next. There were a few extremely ambitious projects started on Lucky Fetish, though perhaps the most ambitious one is Arena by Pony X9. First posted on March 30th, 2016 with over 15,000 views. Multiple different people, including myself, submitted characters to duke it out in the titular arena, and it was set up like an RPG with different stats, gold to be earned and spent, and various activities that could be performed while not in a match, like exercising to increase a stat. For each in-story day, participants would send in their plans for what they would do while not in a match, and their battle plans for when their match came up. Not much was known about the world outside the arena, though because only one day ever passed in the story before the game stopped, it could have been expanded wildly. However, what was posted is insanely well written and detailed, and they were able to capture the feel of each character extremely well, despite none of them being Pony X9's own. One story that captures an undertone of sinisterness and then successfully pulls it to the forefront is Friend Sessions by Anime Panties, first posted on May 13th, 2016, with almost 28,000 views. This one centers on a group of friends who all share a fetish for wedgies, and how their group and worlds change after adding in a factor that would appear at first glance to completely be at odds with them. AP created a DeviantArt account later into the story and started posting the chapters there, and after chapter 16 exclusively posted the continuations on DA. What Remains on Lucky Fetish is a story that focuses on wedgies for the majority of its read time, but from the beginning contains that sinister undertone I mentioned, and has a well-rounded cast of characters that slowly develop and are revealed as the story progresses. There are a few scenes that, also like I mentioned, shove that undertone to the fore and provide a fantastic juxtaposition to the regular lighthearted tone. This story is also a wonderful example of one that very naturally shifts between high-spirited and friendly, and ominous and disquieting. Hannsgutherson has been a pioneer in many ways, and one that really sets him apart from others is his collection of FM stories titled Why We Wedgie and Other Stories, posted on August 18th, 2017 in one of the multi-story threads. He brought together 10 stories he originally posted on Wedgie Haven and combined them into one document, enlisting the help of fellow writers ChaosReacon and Alistair Cade, or Jack538 as they're known on Lucky Fetish, for fore and afterward. There had been a very light sprinkling of people who posted FM stories on the forum, though it had always been frowned upon and discouraged because the vast majority saw the forum as a place strictly for FF wedgies, with the tolerance for MF wedgies. Hans took a bold step in introducing variety to intolerance, in a way that many readers could consume these stories where they might not have been able or willing to before. A major theme of Hannsgutherson's work is taking a random scenario and adding in wedgies to see how it plays out. And one of the more interesting ways he's taken this idea is in Made for Wedgies, posted on October 18th, 2017, in one of the multi-story threads. This story centers on a futuristic setting where robots made specifically for receiving wedgies have become commonplace, and they're awakening to actually feeling wedgies, one many of us would no doubt pay good money to be part of. As DeviantArt became the new hub over the years, it started pulling writers away from Lucky Fetish due to its user-friendly interface and larger audience, as anyone was able to join the website at any time, as opposed to not many people knowing Lucky Fetish even existed and having new user registration shut down from time to time. In some ways, DeviantArt can be viewed as the evolution of Lucky Fetish, though the website was never created with the Wedgie Fetish community in mind, and we simply staked out our own corner, as we have done with so many other platforms.
As for stories or writers that have influenced my work in particular, it's definitely more so Puppy Dog, Battle the Vampire, just that supernatural with just bringing in the fetish, that it doesn't have to be some kind of funny joke, haha kind of thing, that you can mix seriousness with the comical. But even now, just Shadow-melder and Hannsgutherson with Flame Over Darkness has definitely influenced just how to look at some of these stories that I write. Otherwise, stories mainly just being in the other different mediums that I'm a big fan of anime, that you would have simplistic epics like Gurren Lagann, or you would have this very convoluted interwoven world, such as the Fate series, where there's so many different timelines, just seeing how the characters interact with each other, how they respond to the different situations that are placed in front of them. And especially one of the biggest influences on me is Berserk. Is that on one hand, it could be viewed as a power fantasy, but to me, it's that dark fantasy. It is that there is more consequence than what's just on the surface. That it's not just simply the physicality of the situation, it is the mental fatigue. It is just wondering how do you respond in such situations.
There are way too many stories which have inspired me, but just to mention the first three foundational stories, so to speak, along with their authors, would be Pantyborn by Screen Warrior, Two Worlds by Anime Panties, and YWNR by Hannsgutherson.
Blood Money by Nicely Done, Anti-Cherry's entire catalog, especially Luckily Unlucky and Sore Winner, Classroom Wedgie by Colton Washia, High Velocity by Random Person X are a few of the examples, but my list is long and ever changing, so feel free to reach out for a constantly evolving list of writers and works that are constantly influencing me on a daily basis.
So, obviously, the original inspiration for a lot of my work, especially early on, would be good old Cecita, Sleep, other engine writers, etc. Good of that being that they are just such prevalent parts of the community, their work being the most accessible, at least. When you think of this community and when you think of like what sort of story there is, it tends to be the most accessible. But the most what you expect when you Google and search out content in this area and whatnot. And it obviously helps that early on they helped me workshop ideas and they were a good source of inspiration. They're lovely people working over there. Later on, well, later on 2020 happened and it 2020'd everywhere. Uh, I truly hate that meme, but I keep referencing it. I don't know why. But obviously, with everything going on, I found it a lot harder to write. I trying to take inspiration from others I hadn't read quite as much as before, for sake of variety, just to hope that something would stick, and stumbled upon writers who had sort of broken out of that initial mold which I was exposed in the community. Folks like, for example, our dear British friend Super Guy 6060. It's a wonderful urban fantasy series. Call me Cody Pless. That's PLS. I know it's supposed to be please, but I like to say it that way. Who wrote what I consider to be one of the finest multi-chapter stories on the site. Critical Zenoga, who's a wellspring of creativity, as evidenced by his recent project Bullyland. Things that were outside of the niche I'd originally interacted with the most. Niches within niches, almost. Which ultimately led to me wanting to try and put my own spin on things as well. To go even further beyond the niche, in a manner of speaking. All in all, there are numerous talented individuals in the community. I'm sorry if I'm missing anyone that I've interacted with before. I love you all dearly. You're all great. And honestly, I'm grateful to count many of the people of this community among my friends.
I already mentioned it, Hannsgutherson. I think for other mentions, Friend Sessions by Anime Panties, definitely a big inspiration. Specifically for the idea of having a whole bunch of characters have unique ways to wedgie. I've always thought of that and sort of created characters that like they don't all get wedgied in the exact same way. Some of them they only go for more atomics. Some of them they only go for a pure ripping, and it mirrors what happens in Friend Sessions Chapter 9, where all of the girls are getting sort of their own type of wedgie, because every single one of them feels something different about the fetish that they like. And I like that shit, man. I like exploring that because yeah, we are all different in how we enjoy our fetish. Like some of us enjoy the stories more, some of us enjoy the art more, some of us want to explore why we like this. And I kind of wanted to capture that, and I think Friend Sessions captured it in a very good light. So I give that one. And Magni in his entirety, I could say, is an inspiration. Mainly when he started branching off into the you stories, like the second person perspective stuff. That really gave me inspiration to try that out for myself, and it's resulted in some of my most successful works. Not necessarily my favorite works, but the ones that have easily garnered the most attention on DA.
So now looking at everything I've brought forth, one conclusion I can draw is the focus in our stories shifting from wedgies and getting off to narrative and characters. There are still stories abound for just getting off, yet now because of writers like Anti-Cherry and Nicely Done, creators are aware they have the option of going towards something you can actually care about and connect with. A small theory I've come up with is that because of massively popular stories like Luckily Unlucky and Sore Winner, people realize that high quality stories could exist in this fetish, and through them, realize that characters are the most important aspect to readers. Without these major stories highlighted before, we could easily still be stuck writing literary porn rather than telling legitimately amazing stories, ones that we carry with us for the rest of our lives.
As for why we strive to innovate, I think part of that also kind of it's mainly as something that we strive as writers to bring forth something that is unique, that brings a better instance of our work, that we're able to make an impact on not only our work, but to help influence others as to how they can innovate stories, what brand new idea can they apply that we couldn't have even fathomed.
For different reasons, of which one of them could be a desire for self-improvement. Other reasons could just be a need to express oneself or fulfill some ambition.
Why do we strive to innovate in our stories? There's a few complex answers to this, but I'll give you the top line details. One, for the selfish, self interested reason that we want to stand out and gain an audience for something that's different. I think psychologists call it the immortal, or the fact we all want to be immortalized. That's one of the reasons we do it. We want to be remembered. And that's a very selfish, self interested goal. And that's why we innovate. Secondly, because we see others doing the same. We see others trying new things, doing things like visual novels or joining contests, and we want to push the community further as well. We are inspired to emulate them, to try something different, and make the community as a group and collective something we can be proud of. And the third reason is because human beings can't stand sameness. We need to innovate and put our own stamp on things and make it different. So, no matter how many wedgie stories there are, there's always going to be somebody doing something a bit different, or someone trying something new, or writing some different format, or experimenting with the way things are. Plus, humans will always be different with every story they write, so the final products will never be the same. They might just be innovating on a micro scale or trying something slightly different, but that's all still innovation. So if you write one story today and another tomorrow, it's going to be different. So innovation is a natural byproduct of creativity.
For the most part, it's about just fulfillment, or standing out a bit. Obviously, there's the very technical reason of if everyone's writing the same thing, then it's very hard for one to break out and sort of have their own followers and whatnot, or to have their own thing they're known for, which generally leads to a lot of the more outlandish, for lack of a better term, stories out there, trying to put a neat spin on it. Like, ooh, this happens, but it's at Hogwarts, or this happens, but urban fantasy, or this happens, but in space. I've seen one of those, and it was actually very, very neat. It's strange, but anywho, but also there's just a sense of self fulfillment. That is to say, that if you find yourself writing the same thing over and over and over again, then it can become monotonous, can sort of cloud your enjoyment of what you're writing. Which, again, something I've been through a good bit. Very early on, I was just writing the same thing or similar stories over and over, and don't get me wrong, I enjoyed it. But for when you're writing the same thing about twice a week for a year or so, you start to think, what else is out there? Maybe I could try branching out a little bit, and so it feeds into itself. You want to write something new for yourself so that you stand out more, so that more people will notice and give more feedback, if that makes sense.
Overall, the quality in writing has increased, but perhaps way more so, our desire to find meaning in this fetish and explore questions of life, the universe, and ourselves has far surpassed that. For many, this is still just for getting off, but the true evolution that could be said to have happened is an evolution in ourselves. Where before we only discussed the most popular stories and then only in snippets, now we discuss any and every story we want, and I believe the changes in writing and ourselves has led to a true writing community in this fetish, one I'm proud to be part of. To bring this to a close, the wonderful creators you've heard earlier have messages they'd like to be put out into the community.
Be kind to one another. That if you do take a position of, in this instance, power, that you're running a group and whatnot, hold responsibility of it. Because otherwise, not only do you make yourself look bad whenever you do something petty, but you also bring down those around you, those that are only trying to make the community a better place just for them to be held back by you. But otherwise, I just hope that people are willing to come together to enjoy these different stories. As I know, as a writer, it's felt very lonely. That as much as where the big difference now is, I do see a bigger number on my works and such, but in the same vein, just not able to see how you impact each other. Just feeling disconnected. And I hope that we could come together and make a better impact, that there's less of the stigma of, oh, you're only into female stuff, oh, you're only into male stuff, that we can bridge that gap so that it's less of the limitations that hold us back.
I'm happy to see how much the community grows and evolves over time, with new works and new creators coming up all the time, adding their share to the community. And I also want to suggest to not forget to show support to the creators that you enjoy watching. That is, like leaving a comment every now and then in the creations you like, or engaging in discussions or posts that they make. Even if you don't think you'll add much to them, it can make the creator feel better.
What message do I have for the community? I've asked this question to tons of people in the community over the years and answered it myself many times. My answer has never changed. We can be better. Better as writers, meaning we can both be more creative, more innovative, and write stories we can look back on and be really proud of. but also better as community members. We can also embrace the trends we're seeing and that I've been quick to point out over the years. Trends like the fragmentation of the community from one site to countless almost, which leads to innovation, this fragmentation. The burgeoning interactivity and also new types of content that are emerging, and the overall businessification of the community. And we use all of these shifts and trends to move into a new era and actually start a revolution. It feels like everything we've seen before has been paving the way and setting the groundwork, and the only evolution is the one we have to create in the near future if we want writing in the community to evolve and grow and stay fresh and invite new creators to write and reward them for creating. So hopefully we can use all of this to move into this new era where we're making money for our works, helping each other, and overall coming closer together as a community. We've become so fragmented, and I'd love to see us try and come closer together in every sense. Thank you.
Stay great and hang in there. And, well, I firmly believe that everyone has at least one story in them. As someone who enjoys writing more than most things in life, I encourage you to give it a try. Because, well, more the merrier, and I'm sure lots of content creators would like a chance to be as big a fan of you as you are of them.
We're in sort of a slower stage now, is what I'm seeing. And this has happened before, where not a whole lot of new stuff comes out. I would say keep holding out. There will be some new inspiration coming onto the scene. We're just waiting around for it, and I'm personally really excited to see where that new talent comes from. I hope it's soon, but I'll patiently wait. Thank you.
For those of you who have made it to the end, here's an extra special treat. My face on a pretty low-res webcam. So what do you think? Did the fictional writing on Lucky Fetish evolve over time? Is there anything I overlooked or missed? If you have any thoughts or theories on what I've presented today, if there are any stories, topics, ideas, etc. that you'd like to hear me discuss, or if you'd like to come on for an episode, leave a comment or send me a message on DeviantArt or Lucky Fetish as Nufatora. Huge thanks to ChaosReacon, Shadow-melder, Hannsgutherson, RookofSpades, and JCCW for providing wonderful and varied insights into different aspects of this topic. If you're looking for a new story to read, are interested in the change or history of this community, or you just want to reread a story you already enjoy, definitely check out the ones I've highlighted and any from my guest catalog. In fact, just check out Chaos, Shadow, Hans, Rook, and JC anyway, because it'll be time well spent. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of the Best Book Club.